Hey, this is Eddie Hale, and today I want to talk to you about color in Adobe Illustrator. You see, color has a lot to do with light. We're going to consider two different kinds of color. The first one we'll talk about comes from light shining into your eyes, like when you look at a computer screen, or a smartphone, or a television set. The other one comes from light reflecting off from ink, like when you look at a printed book. Alright, the first kind of color, light shining into your eyes. It's called additive color, and the primaries are red, green, and blue. Let me turn off the lights for a minute. I'm going to project onto the wall a red slide. Next, I'm going to project a green slide. Notice that where they overlap, you get yellow. Now I'll project a blue slide onto the wall. Look at how where it overlaps green, you get cyan. Where it overlaps red, you get magenta. And where all three of them overlap, you get white. By combining all three primaries and lighter and darker versions of them, you can get any color in the visible spectrum. It's called additive color because you add the primaries to get white. Brightness is the goal. The second kind of color is light reflecting off from ink, like in a book or a poster. It's called subtractive color. The ink primaries are cyan, magenta, and yellow. You add the primaries together, like this. The ink is transparent, so when you print magenta over cyan, it turns blue. If you print yellow over magenta, you get red, and if you print yellow over cyan, you get green. And where all three overlap each other, you get black. But you don't really get black. It's sort of a watered down black because they can't create inks that are pure enough that when you add them together, you get real black. So printers add a black plate so that you can achieve a real true black. The primary ink colors are cyan, magenta, and yellow, but designers and printers refer to them as CMYK color: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. You can mix millions of colors with CMYK, but RGB can mix more. See, you can make super bright colors in RGB format that you can't achieve with printed ink. Here's a color panel with an RGB color that's called out of gamut. This is the out of gamut warning. It means you couldn't print this bright red in ink. You can only get it with light shining out of a monitor. Designers and printers refer to CMYK color as process color. I don't know why, and I don't care. I just want you to remember process color so that when your boss talks about a process color job, you know what she's talking about. This is called subtractive color because you have to subtract the primaries to get white. What does this have to do with Illustrator? Well, when you make a new document, you have to decide where is this illustration going to print. If your illustration is going to be printed in ink on paper, then you have to choose Print from the Profile drop-down menu. Notice that this document is going to be in CMYK color format, ink on paper. If your illustration is going to be shown on a web page, you would want to use Web from the Profile drop-down menu. Notice that this document is in RGB format. Those are the primaries for light color. What if you mess up and you choose the wrong format? I've done it before where I build a web page illustration in CMYK format. You can always go to File, Document Color Mode, RGB color, and change the color mode later on. Alright, let's mix some colors in Adobe Illustrator. I'm going to make a new document and I'm going to make it in web format. Notice that the color sliders are RGB sliders. If I was choosing a color, I might first drag around in this spot down here. This is called the color ramp. I would try to get into the right neighborhood of the color I'm trying to mix. If I was trying to make it more purple, I like the way the sliders show me which way I can drag to get it more purple or more blue. I want you to notice that these color sliders go from 0 to 255. That's important because people will throw that number around a lot in the design world. Now I'm going to make a CMYK document. Let's pretend I'm making an illustration for print. Click OK. It says up here in the title bar that this is a CMYK document. Now I'm going to mix a color in CMYK. No, don't do it. You see, right now a monitor is trying to estimate what a color is going to look like when it's printed ink on paper. Never trust a monitor to tell you anything about ink that is true. What you need is a process color selector. This is a book with lots and lots of printed examples of CMYK color mixes. Here's how it works. Let's say you were trying to choose a green color. You flip through the book and find a green that you like, and printed below each color are the percentages of each ink, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, in that color. So this is 85, 0, 85, 20. So to get that green in Illustrator, I would double click in the cyan field up here and I would type in 85. Then I would hit my tab key and type in 0, tab again, 85, tab, and type in 20. Hit return, and that's the green. Now, if it doesn't look like the book, don't worry, because this is an RGB monitor trying to show me what that green is going to look like when it's printed. Trust the book. It really is going to look the way it's printed in the book. Last thing, notice that these sliders go from 0 to 100%, unlike the RGB sliders that go from 0 to 255. Okay, so let's recap. If you're making an illustration that will be displayed on a monitor, you will use the RGB format. If you're making an illustration that will be displayed in print, you'll use CMYK format. What if you have an illustration that's going to be used both in print and in a web page? I am lazy. I would probably just work in the RGB format and hope it didn't shift too much when it changed to CMYK. Most purists would probably have two illustrations, one in RGB and one in CMYK. This is an RGB illustration, and I want you to see what happens when I change the mode to CMYK. Look especially at her shirt and her hair and these hair ties here. When I change to CMYK format, they will become less vibrant colors. Did you see that shift? They got a little duller. So you have to be careful of that. Make sure the client doesn't get upset when the colors change just a little bit from the RGB version to the CMYK version. The last thing I want to show you is the swatches panel. If you have a color that you really like, you can drag it from this little preview here into the swatches panel and you'll get a new swatch. There's my new swatch right there. If you wanted, you could double click on it and rename it. I usually don't, but you could. The other neat thing about the swatches panel is you can click this little global field here and turn it into a global swatch. What does that do? Well, it does kind of an interesting thing, I think. If I fill several shapes with this global swatch, and then later on, let's say the client says, I wish her hair were more red, I can double click on that swatch and change the color a little bit, and it will change everything that has had that swatch applied to it. So it could be a time saver. So there you go. Now you know a lot about making colors in Adobe Illustrator. You know that you're going to use RGB format for illustrations that will display on a monitor, CMYK for illustrations that will be printed. So now I want you to come to class all ready to use really neat colors in your illustrations from now on. Thanks for watching.